good afternoon or good morning to you, depending on where you're joining us from across Canada. It's a really great pleasure for me to be here today. My name is Ryan Conway. I'm a program director with the McConnell Foundation, and I'm really happy to have the opportunity to take you through McConnell Foundation's application systems and our focus area orientation, which are going to be the subjects of today's conversation. I'm joined today by my colleague Annie Barabé. I don't know if I'm going to be able to entice Annie to give us the camera for a few minutes just to say hi. So Annie's joining us today. Annie's going to be keeping an eye on our chats and our Q&A. So we'll be able to ask any questions as we're going through there, and hopefully Annie will be able to answer it for us as well. And then tomorrow, Annie is going to be our lead presenter as we do this session again in French. So if anybody prefers to attend a session in French, wasn't aware, we do have one of those running at the same time tomorrow, and you're very welcome to join at that time. So I'm now going to start sharing my screen. And again, welcome you to our session today. So a few quick technical items and orientation pieces before we start. First off, if you'd like to have subtitles, so a written transcript of what's going on for today's session, you can click on the live transcript button, which is at the bottom of your screen across the Zoom menu at the bottom there, and you're able to adjust the size of the subtitles there as well. To ask a question, you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can choose who you're going to share that question with. If you wanted to share it with the host, it's myself and Annie, or if you want to share it with the whole group or wherever you're coming from. We are recording today's session. You should have received a notice from the system as we logged in today to advise you of that, but just wanting to make sure everybody knows again that we are recording the session. Our objective is to be able to put a recording of the session on our website so that people can continue to access it even after we're no longer doing the live session. And we are going to be sending out a copy of today's slides to everybody who's registered for our webinar. So if you're seeing something on here and you're racing to take down notes, don't worry about that. We are going to share these with you. And these slides include a number of helpful links to different web pages that we're going to want to share with you as well as we're going through. Before we actually begin the content of today's session, we would like to acknowledge where McConnell Foundation is situated. Of course, we're all working remotely in our jobs. I'm personally in Ottawa today, which is on unceded Anishinaabe territory. But the head offices of the McConnell Foundation are located on traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, or Mohawk people. And this has long been a place for meeting and exchange and the development of relationships and sharing. This is something that we like to carry forward in the work that McConnell does, and we're going to be bringing that theme back a little bit more today as we take you through the very first one of our webinars on our new applications process and our new focus areas, and hoping to start that relationship and that partnership conversation with you about how this new process can work and how we can learn and exchange from one another as we both go through it for the first time. So for today, our agenda is to go over a little bit of background and orientation on the McConnell Foundation for those who don't know us that well. We're then going to go into our first part, which is looking at those focus areas, or the three spaces that McConnell is focusing our funding support in the next year and in the years ahead. And then to go over an orientation of what the two-step application process is through the McConnell Foundation. We're changing our application system and hoping to make it both more responsive and better aligned to our focus areas. So we'll be taking that through what that system is going to look like when it launches in a few days. We'll also provide some resources and have time for questions and discussion. I'm not able to see the chat live or the Q&A, so I'm going to pause quickly here and ask Annie if there's anything I should address before I move on to the next section.
Nothing so far. Lots of hellos from across Turtle Island. So are you all good?
All right, great, thank you. So a quick background and orientation on the McConnell Foundation. We're a pan-Canadian family foundation that was founded in 1937, so we have been around for quite a long time. When we say pan-Canadian, to indicate that we do work right across the full geography of this wonderful country, and are happy to work in both of our official languages. We focus on work that advances a resilient, inclusive, and sustainable society that can successfully address its complex challenges. And those are all really important ideas for us here at McConnell: resilience, inclusion, and sustainability, and that complex systemic approach to different ideas. You'll see that come forward in the different focus areas that we're going to spend some time talking about today. We're going to spend most of our time today talking about McConnell's role as a funder. And this is, of course, for organizations that are looking to apply to McConnell to access funding, the funding that we offer under our focus areas. That's not the only work that McConnell does. McConnell does considerable work as an investor. Of course, we're an endowed foundation, and there's a lot of work that's done on the investment side to also advance that mission that we talked about. Convening work is a big part of what we do, as is capacity building and supporting organizations in their advocacy. And we're also very interested in, it's very much at the core of what we do, of wanting to be a strategic learning partner. Those organizations that we're fortunate enough to be able to support, we want to have that mutual learning relationship, so that we're able to see and gain all that wonderful knowledge from the work that's happening, and that we're privileged and positioned enough to be able to support with funding. So our big theme for today, or the big three themes for today, are the focus areas. Those who know McConnell, who have known McConnell for a long time, have probably seen different generations of how McConnell articulates its strategy and where it's focusing its energy for sort of the last decade, coming into the 2020s. Social innovation was a really strong, prominent concept in our strategy work, and it remains a really core component of how we like to work within our systems and with organizations in our sector. But we are now also for the last year and going forward, focusing on these three focus areas in all of our work, in all of those roles that I talked about, including our role as a funder. So communities is the first among those focus areas. We look to strengthen the collective resilience and create conditions for more inclusive and future-ready communities. That's a strong priority for us. Reconciliation is another. McConnell's worked in reconciliation in various ways for 15 or about 20 years, but now we have a specific focus area dedicated to reconciliation and the advancement of a reconciliation economy, where we're equitably sharing and sustainably stewarding wealth and resources, and looking to close the socioeconomic gaps that are existing in the well-being of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada. And then finally, the focus area of climate. One of the great complex global scale challenges of our time, and McConnell put significant energy into this climate focus area of how can we support the transition of Canada to a net zero carbon economy, and importantly, how can we do that in a way that is sustainable and equitable for everybody in our country. So I'm going to go into a little bit more depth on each of these focus areas, because these three focus areas are what are going to form the backbone of our new application process. So we want to make sure we're giving as good an orientation to these as we can. So under communities, we have three strategies that we put forward. All of this information, of course, is also available on the McConnell website. If you go to our focus areas, or if you look at the apply for funding pages, there's lots more detailed information on these subjects. I'm just going to give a little bit of a précis of it here today, but definitely happy to be able to provide more information for those who are interested. So first, under communities, we have this concept of building social and civic infrastructure, and these are these social and civic infrastructure pieces. These are the means and conditions for people to learn from and to care for one another and to create a better society. So it can look like a lot of things. It can look like new neighborhood connection mechanism. It can look like new networks, new systems, and changes in policy. Anything that's really going to be strengthening social and civic cohesion and work in a community kind of falls under this strategy of the community space. Under communities, we also look at supporting work that focuses on inclusive community building. So this is where we have collaborative and innovative projects that are working towards civic and economic inclusion across the entirety of communities, as much as we're able to do that. So where are organizations and collaboratives of organizations working to address systemic socioeconomic barriers for underrepresented communities or communities that are facing marginalization or other barriers? And finally, and you'll see this third one is a bit of a running theme across our focus areas, we have the strategy of increasing impact with innovative financial solutions. And this is where we're looking at using mechanisms like solutions finance, or you may have heard it called the different social finance approaches, to get capital deployed in ways that are catalyzing, sustaining, and supporting the scaling of systemic change in communities. So we have a special interest in looking at how those financial innovations are actually being put forward under the community space. Under reconciliation, we have similarly, we have 3 strategy spaces. The first is collaborative funding models. And here, this is where we're looking at supporting work that has partnerships of organizations that are creating funding models that really prioritize Indigenous-led philanthropy. So this is where McConnell wants to be able to support projects that are themselves Indigenous-led and looking at new models of how funding can be put into that space to work on those things. So it's bringing new partners to the table. It's shared administration for greater efficiency, and it's leveraging human, financial, all kinds of other different resources to get into new funding models that are Indigenous-led and are therefore better meeting the needs of Indigenous communities. We have the second strategy under reconciliation of supporting innovative platforms for change. And this is where we're looking to partner with organizations that are working with a variety of different stakeholders in community and at systems levels to test new ways of solving problems. So when we talk about some of those socioeconomic inequities that exist in Canada around housing, around food security, education, employment, all of those concepts, this is where we're looking for what are some of the creative and innovative platforms that can come forward and really catalyze and sustain and create the level of change that's necessary to help those gaps close. And then finally, we have the theme again of increasing impact with innovative financial solutions. So again, social finance and other approaches that can be brought in place to support Indigenous-led work and other programs that utilize new types of funding approaches to create those positive impacts. And finally, we have our focus area around climate. And of course, an incredibly important one for our time and and for all time to come. The first strategic area under here is climate mitigation solutions, or specifically, what are we looking at in terms of ideas that can actually contribute to reducing carbon emissions? That's the really crucial point that comes out here. And so, what are the projects that can be addressing systemic barriers that are preventing us from reducing carbon emissions and creating effective climate change policy in this country? So we really do focus on that. And the second piece under climate is around diversity and inclusion and the creation of equitable outcomes for all within the climate space. So here we're looking at work that's including marginalized or underrepresented or racialized or other vulnerable people who may not be properly engaged or represented in the work right now, and we want to create new opportunities for an equitable transition to the net zero carbon economy. So if they've been traditionally excluded or marginalized, how are we removing and empowering, or removing barriers and empowering people to participate in these conversations? And then finally, we also have a theme under climate related to sustainable finance. Here, it's not just sort of the concepts of solutions finance or other innovations in that space, but how are we increasing the flow of capital to create an equitable transition? There's a lot of investment and other forms of capital in Canada and around the world that flow into things that are related to carbon in some way, and we're looking at how can we change some of those flows so that those are better aligned with climate mitigation solutions and the outcomes of diversity, inclusion, and equity. So I'm going to pause here again, Annie, and just ask for any questions that people may have about the focus areas as they've been coming in. So not specific questions, about would my project fit a focus area? Because we're going to have lots of opportunity to talk about that. I'll talk a little bit about that in the second half. But are there any clarifying questions on the focus areas themselves that I may be able to offer at this point? And I'll take questions for a couple minutes here if people have them. All right, we had one question come in. I think it's been answered, but just to get for the benefit of everybody, does McConnell consider communities geographically or more broadly as, say, communities of interest? We have both. Both lenses are able to come into our work. If we're looking at the community's focus area, certainly that could be at a locally scaled or a geographic community, but absolutely McConnell works in a pan-Canadian space, and there's the ability to support projects at that level as well. All right. We have a question coming in here. Should a strong application try to focus on all three focus areas? Fantastic question. Thank you, Gord. When we get into the applications process section, you'll see that an application is actually going to be asked to choose one focus area as the primary lens for its framing. So as we're going through, be asked to choose a primary one. So either climate, reconciliation, or communities, but you have the chance in an application to speak to how a project may address all of those focus areas in its work. So to say it definitely has to strongly align to one, and if there's alignment across other ones, that's fantastic, and we'd love to see it. It's not a prerequisite that it try to align to all three focus areas or that it align to more than one, but there is that requirement that we have that primary focus area coming in, and that's able to give our team and our reviewers the best lens through which to assess applications. We have a question like, would innovative business incubators at post-secondary institutions fall into the reconciliation stream if they focus on empowering equity diversity groups and partnering with Indigenous partners? You know, I won't speak specifics. You know, we're talking a bit in a hypothetical here, but yeah, if we're talking about an incubator that's a new platform that's coming in and we're working with Indigenous partners in new ways, then that could be an innovative platform for change, and there could be some resonance with the reconciliation space in that one. We have a question on what kind of financial solutions or strategies do we have in mind? Here it's, you know, there's a wonderful buffet of new ideas out there in social finance. As we look at the approaches there are repayable social finance investments, there are bonds, there are different mechanisms that are put in place, and they can be operated at all kinds of scales, you know, down from the micro up to the macro levels. So there's a lot that could be included within that. There's a lot of information on the McConnell website about some of the things that we've worked on to date in solutions finance. I'd encourage people to take a look at those, but also not to be bounded by what's been done so far, when there's plenty of other financial solutions and innovations out there yet to be discovered. We have the question of what's the difference between point 1 and 2 in the first focus area. So let me go back to that. So we're talking building civic and social infrastructure and inclusive community building. They can be very closely related. And again, these are points that could definitely intersect. So civic and social infrastructure, we would there be talking about what are the systems, the networks, the pieces that are being put in place to create stronger social outcomes for people in their communities. And when we're talking about inclusive community building, that's where we're obviously talking about how are all of the members of our community being included in the work and how are outcomes being advanced in an equitable way. So you could certainly have a project that's working on both of those in both of those spaces. Do proposals need to touch on all three areas related to climate, or if they meet 1 or 2, is that sufficient? So we'll go to the climate slide here. As we go through the application, you'll be asked to select. So say you select climate as the primary lens for your application, you'll be asked to select which of these 3 you'd like to answer a question on as you get into the later stages of the application. So if it's just 1, then you just answer 1. If it's all 3, then you can just answer 3. We're running a little bit short on time, so
Ryan, I can continue answering in writing the questions if you want to go ahead with
perfect. That'd be great. Thank you, Annie. So now we're going to get into the application process because everybody likes talking about process. That's a great lunch hour. That's fun for everybody, right? So McConnell has 4 forthcoming, it's going to be coming out soon, what we call a two-step application process. For those who have applied to McConnell in the past, or who've taken part in our applications process that we have online currently, that's a one-step application process where you fill out an entire application, you submit to McConnell, and then the process starts of assessment and hearing back. We're now changing to a two-step application process that's going to have a couple different points added into it. We're doing this with a few objectives in mind. One, we want to lessen the burden upfront on organizations that are looking to apply to the McConnell Foundation for partnership and support. And we'd also like to give organizations that chance to talk a little bit more about their project from a focus area perspective, rather than have to focus on the incredible details of a project and the operational elements of it in that first go of the application. And we'd also like to be able to be more responsive to our community here as we're going through this process. So this two-stage process is going to allow us both to indicate sooner in the process if a project is a good fit and is therefore moving forward in our process, but also if a project isn't something that's going to fit within the McConnell focus areas, that an organization is receiving that information sooner as well. So this sort of linear process that you're seeing here is a small linear component of what we like to think of as a bigger cycle or a bigger system that involves the relationship that we have with all of the partners that we work with. And so we're going to be focusing on this a little bit here today, but try to think of it as part of a feedback cycle where we're experimenting and learning as we're going through this two-stage. We'd like to hear and gain as much perspective on it as we can, so that we can make it better and better suit the aims that we're aiming to have with this work rolling out, but also what's going to best work for those organizations in our community. So the first step in the application process is the engage and inform, or sort of the pre-application stage, and you're all part of it right now. So, taking part in this information session, going and accessing the resources that are on the McConnell website, where we have more information on our focus areas, on ideas like solutions finance and things like that. That's all part of the engage and inform stage. We're also going to have the opportunity to have office hours with McConnell staff. This is something that we've never offered before at the McConnell Foundation, and we're going to be piloting it as a part of rolling out this two-stage process. So there's a link here. Everybody's going to be getting a PDF of the webinar, so you'll be able to access this link. You don't have to hurry and write it down now. But if you'd like to, before even putting together an application, have a conversation with one of the McConnell staff members who's a lead on one of the focus areas, you're going to be able to do so and book that session right through our website. Our focus area leads have made their time available so that they're able to have quick sort of 15-minute conversations with people, just have that chance to sort of do a test or do a bit of an orientation conversation and see if the idea that you're looking at is something that will have resonance with our focus areas, or I should better say that our team members are going to be able to provide as much information as they can about the lens through which something is going to be reviewed when it comes into McConnell, and hopefully that's of some assistance to organizations that are looking to apply. So we're engaging and we're informing. There's the website. There's this information session. There's having those one-on-one office hours conversations with our team members, and of course, lots of other resources that are out there in the sector. The second step is to register. In order to be able to use the McConnell online application portal, which is called Flux, you need to register as a user in Flux. So again, this link is going to be available, but you register on the Flux system. It usually takes, maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of a day, a little bit more if there's a lot of registrations coming in at the same time, just for our system to confirm that all your details are there, and then you're registered in the system, and then you never have to do that again. You're in there, and your registration can be attached to multiple applications and everything like that. It's a one-shot deal. Next is stage one, and this is part of the changes that are coming into our application system. So stage one is a short application. It's a limited number of questions. It's through the online granting portal. And here there's eligibility confirmation. There's a bit of a readiness assessment. Organizations are asked to give a basic project overview And organizations are also asked to talk about the focus area alignment that they see for their project. So how are they, you'll be asked to choose one of the focus areas as a lens for your application, be asked to speak to that, as well as if you're seeing alignment in other focus areas. And there's some organizational details that be included there as well. At this stage, you're not asked to submit a full budget for a project. You're asked to give the very general outlines of the budget, like what would be the overall scope and how much are you requesting McConnell Foundation to support, but you do not need to have a detailed budget prepared at stage 1. After stage 1 is submitted, it's then reviewed by McConnell for a fit with our focus areas. So the McConnell review process starts, and there's committee review for seeing whether a prospective idea is a fit for a focus area or not. And that really is the primary screen that's put on it at this stage. So we're not going into the details of a project. We're not going into its operational minutia, partly because that's not included in stage 1. That's also not exactly relevant at this point. Really what we're looking at is the strategic fit. Is it something that's going to have alignment with those focus areas, and therefore is it something that is suitable to take forward to our second stage of application, where we're going to be asking for more of those details. This stage will take approximately 1 month, and you'll either hear back for an invitation to submit a full application, or if we don't feel there's a focus area fit, be receiving a message that McConnell is declining the application. If there's a strong focus area fit, be asked to submit a longer detailed application. It'll be through the same granting portal. It's actually just going to be, you go back into the portal and some new questions will have appeared for you to be able to fill out. And this is where we're going to have more detail included around the particulars of the project plan. What are the equity, diversity, and inclusion considerations? What are some of the partnerships at play? What are some of the evaluation pieces? More detail on how you're seeing alignment with McConnell's focus areas, and that greater detail on the budget. These are all things that would have been included in just one stage of application in our current system, and we're breaking them out now so that we have that midpoint check-in of reviewing for strategic fit to see if something's focus area aligned before we ask for all of this to be submitted. After that's submitted, it then goes through McConnell's due diligence process. You receive a note from us that would identify who your lead is on the McConnell team. So if you're applying under our climate focus area, you may get a note that says Annie Barabé is your lead, and she's going to be stewarding you through our due diligence process, and that process continues. That's a one-on-one process. By and large, it tends to follow different forms depending on what projects are looking like, and ultimately, if that does lead to funding from the McConnell Foundation, you're looking at a funding timeframe of approximately sort of 4 to 6 months from the outset of your work as we're going through. There are a few things to keep in mind as part of this process. First, there's no deadlines to apply for the McConnell Foundation. We have a continuous intake, and that application can really happen on your schedule. We're reviewing on a rolling basis, so everything is getting looked at all the time, and there really isn't a seasonal advantage to applying at one time or another. We accept applications in English and in French, and very, very happy. If you want to put both languages in your application, you're welcome to do that as well. There's also not a running clock on your application. You can complete your application in your own time. You can save it and you can return to it at a later date on our system. Even if, for instance, you've registered and you've started off an application and you've saved it, but then, things happen and you leave it for a month and then you want to come back to it and the idea has changed and you want to make edits, you can absolutely do that. It's really flexible in our system. And a really important date to keep in mind, this 2-stage process is going to start on February 1st. So if the technology gods smile upon us and we're able to get everything aligned for February 1st, that'll be the first date at which you're able to submit one of these 2-step applications. So between now and then, our website is actually going to still reflect the old, much longer form of application that we had in place. But as of February 1st, this opportunity is going to be there to start on the 2-stage process and go through what is hopefully sort of that better aligned system that we're working on. Office hours will actually start next week, so they'll be available in advance of the opening of the 2-stage process. So that link that we had on the previous slide, we'll have it again later. those will be available and accessible to book starting next week. Or I should say, they're available and accessible to book today. Appointments start next week. There's also a listing here of things that we do not consider, or I should say, under most circumstances, these are not considered by the McConnell Foundation. There are some exceptions. For instance, if you're applying for funding specifically under our Montreal geography, there's particular details about that on our website under our funding section that I'd encourage you to take a look at. But generally, for the type of focus area funding that we're talking about today, there are things that we don't consider. So general fundraising requests, capital accumulation, annual operating, partisan activities, international development activities, film and video production, primary activity being a conference, or things like that. All this information, again, is available on the website. It's something you're going to have to see and sort of tick off as you're completing our applications. But it's important for us to frame it here as well, just so we're providing as much clarity as we can. And finally, on this application process, I'd like to provide a few resources for you. So one is our applicant FAQ. There's lots of good information in there. And that's going to be continued to be updated as we actually roll out the two-step process, and we see which questions are getting asked most frequently, and how we can better hone our responses. There's our website focus area pages, lots of detail on there. There's the McConnell Foundation funding database, a great resource to see what we've supported in the past. As of February 1st, when the system comes online, you're going to be able to see the full sample application. So you'll be able to download a PDF and see, even if you're making it to the second stage of application, what are those questions going to be? So you can prepare for that. And again, you have this opportunity to book an office hours conversation with members of our team. So really do encourage people to take advantage of those and see if there's some advice that we can offer one-on-one. Got a couple little pieces of advice here, just that tend to apply in most circumstances. One, we really encourage people to write in their own words. McConnell has language on its site about how we talk about ideas, but you really don't need to mirror what we're putting out there. Those focus areas are things that we look for ideas in, and we're really interested in seeing how those resonate and what they mean for you, and therefore how you would interpret them in your project. And finally, we're really looking at providing support here for work that's going to be creating solutions or creating positive change in communities. So ideally, we're looking at what is that solution? What is that change-making element, as opposed to sort of focusing on the problem itself or the diagnostic of that problem, because there's limited space in an application to convey ideas. And chances are you don't need to spend as much time as you think convincing us of the challenge. We're much more interested in change. And I'll pause here again for questions and discussion on the application process itself. All right.
Lots of questions. I tried to do my best to answer, Ryan, but one question we have is the link to book in office hours with staff. Do we have that in our presentation?
Yeah, it's in the presentation in a couple points, so people will have it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so that link is going to be there. I'm going to try and run through a few of the questions here. If we've already submitted a funding request by using the current application form, do we need to submit again once the new process comes into effect? That's a question from Sonia. Thanks, Sonia. You absolutely do not. If you have a current application sitting in the McConnell system, we're going to assess it based on that submission. So you don't need to start all over. If you've got one that you're working on, you can absolutely submit that and include it. We're not going to be making anybody do anything twice. We have a question: are there any limits on the number of stage 1 applications an organization can submit? There isn't. I don't believe there's a technical limit in terms of what you can submit in our system, but logically, an organization is submitting one piece at a time and hearing back from McConnell on that point. But there isn't. I don't think the system is going to create any serious impediments to, for instance, if you've submitted an idea and it was perhaps declined at stage 1, and then a couple months later you'd like to come back with a different idea that you feel has greater focus area alignment, you absolutely be able to submit that, and there's, it's not going to be a count against it's not going to be a strike. I've seen a couple questions come in here if we're going to be talking about Interweave. For those who don't know, Interweave is a coaching program. It's an initiative of McConnell Foundation. We're not going to be talking specifically about this today. This is just funding related to McConnell's focus areas. If you do have questions on Interweave coaching, I'd encourage you to check out interweave.ca. And Interweave hosts a lot of sessions like we're doing here today. These FAQ sessions and orientations and things like that. And the Interweave staff is always available to answer questions one-on-one. You just write to info@interweave.ca, and they're happy to have some time to chat. We have a question here on the funding scale for proposals. Andy's answering that one. All right, great. We have a question, will a PDF of the applications be available for those who prefer to work offline? There'll be a PDF of the application available for you to download and see, so that you could complete your responses in a different doc. You will then have to port them over into our online system to be able to submit. But yeah, as of February 1st, that will be available. We have a couple questions here on the eligibility considerations. I'd encourage folks to take a look at some of our FAQs on these points. There's nuance to some of these things. For instance, if we're talking about the training or the nature-based solutions or things like that. Obviously, there are circumstances where things like that can definitely fit into the focus area space. But there are other spaces, for instance, if you're applying to McConnell Foundation for a request for funds to, conserve a large piece of land or something like that, that would generally fall out of scope of our work. Or if you're requesting funding to McConnell to, run a university course on a particular subject, that's probably not in scope. We have a question here on multi-year funding. McConnell funding for this type of focus area support that we're talking about is actually usually going to be multi-year. In fact, we would very rarely see this falling in an annual space. We're generally talking about funding that's going over kind of that 3 to 5 year space. We have a question on applicant organization setup. So can you be a nonprofit or perhaps a nonprofit but with a public purpose, or do you have to be a charity? You do not have to be a charity to work with McConnell Foundation and to have support through us. You will be asked if you're a charity as part of the registration process, and you can indicate if you are or not. There are a couple options related to working with organizations that are not for profit or that don't have CRA registered charitable status. There are options related to using a fiduciary or even other arrangements like that. So if you're not a charity, don't consider that the end of the line. Still, submit your idea if you feel it's got that strong focus area resonance, and we definitely have the ability to work something out. We have a question here on what can be discussed during office hours. Can we get feedback on our project idea? So during office hours, certainly it's a really good idea to sort of brief the McConnell team lead who you're going to be talking to, sort of this is our idea. And that team lead is going to be able to provide some nuance and some further information on the lenses through which an idea like that would be assessed. But your team lead from McConnell is not going to provide direct feedback on an idea or, for instance, review a draft application or something like that. That's not something that we do during office hours, simply because it's actually not in an organization's interest for one person from our team to do that, because then you're only getting feedback and input from one person on our team, and one person on our team is obviously not the determining factor in our assessment process. So it's best during an office hours if we're just able to provide those ideas around being as clear as we can about what McConnell is where we're coming from in our space. And not able to, for instance, say, put this in your application, don't put this in your application. It's not a type of feedback that ultimately is going to serve very well. For a large organization like a university, do you recommend a central person to register in Flux, or should each applicant have a new registrant? That's going to depend on I guess sort of the structure of what's coming in. I'll say in our systems we do have multiple points of registration from large organizations, and that's fine. That's no challenge on our end. So if you're coming from a university and you have one department or one school who's applying on this, and you have another space that's applying on this and they apply separately, there's no problem with that. But we will do our best, just to make sure that organizations are coordinating on their end, so that, for instance, we don't have 4 or 5 applications coming in from one university, and it looks like maybe they're not sure which one of those would be the priority. We have a question on the inclusion of elders in our work. That's absolutely a key component of the work in reconciliation. And if there are ideas around innovative and new ways to include elders in the different processes that we're talking about, that's work that's absolutely eligible. Couple more questions on the office hours. One, I think I mentioned, we can't review a draft application. But another question on, what's the most important concept to present in office hours? I would say in office hours, the most important thing to come away with is, are you clearer on how a McConnell focus area lens would be applied to your project? So really the person who should be getting something out of this is you. And you want to make sure that your McConnell team lead has given you all the clarity that you need. We have questions on not-for-profit and charity. I think we've answered that. We have a question on matching requirements or preferences in the McConnell Foundation. McConnell Foundation does not require matching in the financing of our projects. It's of course very rare that McConnell would ever fund a project in its entirety. That's not usual. But you're not going to be required to indicate, for instance, that McConnell funding either is acting as a match or will be matched in any form. We have a question of, do we fund research projects related to McConnell's priorities? This is one of those things where it's good to check the eligibility criteria to see if there's any, perhaps multiple points it touches on there, and perhaps have an office hours conversation on that, or put an inquiry into info@mcconnell.ca to learn more about that. Generally speaking, strictly research, like academic research projects, tend to fall out of scope of McConnell funding. Will a summary of the Q&A be provided along with the slides in the recording? I do not know. I might have to defer to Adrian here to know if that's even possible. If it's possible, we'll do it for you, but I'm not sure.
We will do our best to provide a summary of the questions that were answered and the responses provided.
Fantastic. The question, do we fund pilot projects? It's certainly possible that we're funding pilot projects. McConnell funding can come through at a bunch of different scales. So, generally a focus area project is something that's, it's not at the micro scale. It's more at say, 100, 150 a year or points north of that. But if there is a pilot project idea that's coming in, it's absolutely things that McConnell has funded in the past, and if there's strong focus area resonance, we'd be interested in seeing it. This is a good point where checking the McConnell funding database for other recent things that have come through may be helpful or indicative. We have a question on academic research. What about for research that's creating new baseline data that will specifically create policy insights and recommendations? That may be a good question to explore a little bit further. A project itself, strictly a research and data gathering project, probably falls a little bit on the line. But there are certainly other projects that we've undertaken where data collection and its mobilization for policy change are key parts of those work. So, again, it's something that could be a little bit nuanced, but it's a little bit there. We have a question on the social innovation funding stream. Is it also moving to the same two-stage process, and does it also have an office hours question? Thank you, Simon. It's a great question. The Social Innovation Fund is now going to be processed through this new two-step application process through the focus area lens. So you're not going to be able to choose social innovation funding as part of our application systems anymore as of February 1st. So you'll be asked to choose one of the 3 focus area lenses through which the submission can come in. So we're, as we mentioned, very interested in seeing those innovative solutions and those new ideas come in, but everything that gets supported through the McConnell Foundation gets looked at through this focus area lens. And so if you have an idea that was, a really good fit for our social innovation funding stream that existed in the past, and you'd still like to submit it because it has good focus area alignment, absolutely still submit it. There'll be some guidance in our system about how to submit ideas like that through our focus areas portals, but it's going to have to come in through the focus area portal. I have a question on the geography. Does McConnell prefer to fund projects that have broader geographical scope, provincial, national, or do you also consider a focus on local communities? We do both. I would say our preferred scale of focus is systems, and those systems can operate at different geographies, right? If it's something that's working at a provincial, regional, national scale or pan-Canadian scale, then absolutely. If it's something that's place-based or more geographically centered, we're happy to look at that too. Is there still different consideration for Montreal-based projects? Yes, there is. There's through our, I believe it's our funding page, our apply for funding page. I'm not sure which. There's a section on projects that are specifically the Montreal-based projects, and there's some more information there on what can be done through that. And those don't. If you're coming in through that channel, there's a different application system. Do we fund community land trust projects working for social equity with a focus on Indigenous and access to land? Just on that brief description, it sounds interesting. It definitely seems like something we'd be interested in learning more about. We have worked with community land trusts in the past, and there's been some really cool work done in those spaces. Can we speak to a point of whether an ongoing community program might be eligible if it meets priority areas? For instance, does it need to be a scaling up, out, or piloting new elements in order to be eligible? There is a, there's a bias in the McConnell system to looking at projects that are really creating those positive changes. And yes, to an extent, we're looking for projects that are able to do that with some scale, or that have a view to that impact being able to grow and be able to reach more or change impact in different ways. So ongoing program operating funding is generally not going to fall within the scope of the work that we're doing. But for instance, if you're working on a community program and there's an opportunity to really scale up, out deep in the work that it's being done, then or maybe perhaps replicate it in different areas, then that's something to be considered. I have a question: if we've been declined in the past, can we still apply? Absolutely, you can. We have a question on what do we mean by system-based for project funding. There's a little bit more information on this under each of our focus areas as to what some of those systems approaches indications are for that. This is where we get into that concept of we like to be working on complex challenges and supporting ideas that are in those spaces. But again, it changes a little bit based on the focus area space that you're in. So I'd encourage looking at our focus area pages or having one of those office hours conversations if one of those focus areas feels like a space that you're interested in. We have an evaluation question. Are projects required to demonstrate just change in infrastructure, or how the change in infrastructure has impacted people, or both? Under the community's focus area, this question is. I would tend to say we're talking both. Ultimately, we're talking impacts or positive impacts on people. But this is where things like scope and scale and timeline can really come into play. If something's going to be a 10-year or a generational change, obviously that puts a different lens on something. So if we're talking positive social change in civic infrastructure or social infrastructure, then that sort of meets our initial space, and we'd be interested in the conversation. Will the foundation consider funding academic scholarships, fellowships, etc., as part of an overall request? As part of an overall request, I would say perhaps. Generally speaking, if the primary activity is scholarship or subsidy or a piece of that nature, it falls within the we do not consider category. There may be instances where fellowship work is very closely aligned to the execution of a project and therefore a component of it, or student work is an important component of the execution of a project, and that may fall within scope. But the creation of a scholarship, for instance, is not something that would be supported. For a project involving Indigenous environmental education perspective, should it fall into the focus area of reconciliation or climate? When we come into, sort of, should a project be in this focus area or in this focus area? That's a great question for office hours. But also keep in mind, you can have a primary one on your application, and then you can have a section to elaborate on how it also focuses on other ones. I would generally say if it's coming into the reconciliation focus area, we're very strongly looking at, is this something that is Indigenous led and that is focusing on those partner collaboratives or those innovative platforms for change. We have a question again on the duration of the process. So generally, assuming it's funded, we're looking at 4 to 6 months. All right. Do we prioritize projects led by community members for fellow community members, for instance, around disability justice or accessibility? Yeah, absolutely. In some of the more detailed information that we have on our focus areas on the website, you can see where those criteria around inclusion kind of come into play, and it's a really strong element to include in projects, and definitely something that has resonance with the inclusion factors that we see in some of our focus areas. We have a question on funding. How is funding released? Is it released in stages? If so, how does that work? Every arrangement tends to be, a little bit custom in how funding is done. It will tend to be released not all at one time, but with significant amounts coming at the first stage, or as soon as funding is confirmed, and then some continuing throughout the duration of a project, particularly if it's a longer project. If it gets getting into the sort of 3, 4, 5 year space. And generally there's a small amount that comes at the conclusion of a project as well. For Indigenous-led reconciliation projects, do you have Indigenous advisors to help screen the asks? We do have an Indigenous team here at McConnell who plays lead role in the reconciliation focus area, and we do have advisors and support that help us with strategy and engagement. Would you fund program planning or development work? A little bit hard to answer in the abstract. If it's part of a larger parcel of work, and we're able to see sort of how that's going to play out in positive social change, and it's certainly possible. But yeah, sorry, Daniel, I may not be able to give a great answer there on just that idea. All right, we're coming up on the hour, and very, very grateful for everybody having joined us and had the opportunity to learn a little bit about the session. I'm going to hang out. I'm going to stay on and continue to answer questions as they come in the Q&A. And those that are interested are welcome to remain on with me. But otherwise, we can sort of consider the formal agenda concluded, and wish everybody a fantastic day going forward. Really look forward to hearing from some of you in office hours, and seeing if some of your applications come in after the system comes online on February 1st.